can you put 100% of what's on a tape in terms of dynamic range and frequency response onto a lacquer when you cut it now? Not worrying about the fact that people play it on cheap turntables, because everybody today hopefully is playing it on a decent turntable.
Well, yeah, I think we can. Yeah, we can put it on the lacquer. I think okay, that's what I'm getting at. The limitation is that, remember, this is a mechanical medium, and the cutter head doesn't know what's going to try to follow the groove. The cutter head doesn't care. It doesn't even care how fast the disc is going. It's just putting the signal out. And if you cut it into the lacquer, it might not track. Because now, if you get something like a big cymbal crash, high end is very difficult for playback systems to track. So if you get a lot of energy in the high end or in sibilants or something like that, it could be cut in the disc perfectly. But the playback stylus can't be as sharp, for one thing, as the playback stylus, or else you'd cut a new groove. So what happens is the playback stylus sees this real radical groove coming up, and it's like, uh-oh, and it can't follow it. And so you get that tearing sound, smearing sound, or something like that. That's why when it comes to cutting a good disc, it's not like digital, which has only one limitation, and that's peak level. With vinyl, in order to really cut a good disc, you have to be aware of all of these limitations. And it doesn't mean it can't sound fantastic. It's just that you cannot exceed those limitations, or else the disc won't sound good. So that's a lot of the preparation that we go through, is experimenting with how well it's going to track. And then remember, it's a moving target. The quality varies from the outer edge to the inside of the disc. So, and you can even do interesting things to prove this. You can have like a sibilant S at 33 1/3 RPM, and you can run the turntable all the way up. We can run everything at 78, and it'll be clean as can be because everything's spread out. The signal is spread out. Now the playback stylus has an easier time of following it. But the more dense it gets, the more difficulty the stylus has to follow it.
But there's something mesmerizing about listening to records that you don't get with any. I mean, I've been involved in this since CDs first came out. The sound of it drove me crazy. I hated the sound at the beginning, and I still don't like it. And I know that I talk to a lot of young people, and they say when they hear a record, it calms them down and it makes them want to listen. What is that?
It is more comfortable. Yeah, vinyl is more comfortable to listen to. Now, of course, a lot of the latest recordings, a lot of them are done right off the CD master, so they're not.
But why is it okay? Let me see this. All three this question.
Let somebody else answer.
Okay,
that.
Somebody else, if they can answer. So Bob Dylan's latest record was made here by Al Schmidt, recorded it at high resolution, but Bob didn't like any of the high resolution masters, and he made them release his CD reference cut. That's what ended up happening. I wasn't supposed to ever tell anybody this, but it got out. Somebody let it out. Bob Krasnow let it out. So it's out there. So I don't care. So they actually released the CD, his reference test CD, that rough mix, and the vinyl was cut from that. Okay. If I sat you all down and played that record versus the CD, and asked you which sounds more like a guy's playing music in front of you in a room with a band, it would be the record. It's not even close. So why is that?
The record was cut from the CD, you said?
Yeah, that's the only thing there was. Why is that?
The only thing I can say is that...
Am I crazy? Well, I am crazy, but that's another story.
Well, I think Bob probably picked it because that was the one he was used to. And he became used to that, so anything that strayed from that, whether it was high res, whatever, he didn't like.
Is that a reason why musicians should not be in charge of this part of the process? Seriously, because Jimmy Page did all the Led Zeppelin records, and have you heard those files versus what you did? Well, don't. Because yours are so much better. It's true the tape was 20 years newer, but the records you cut for classic, that's why they go for hundreds of dollars now, even though you can buy the new version for 30 or whatever. Because he shouldn't be involved in his own records, I think.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to add one other thing, and that is, when I cut something from a CD, which I'd rather not do, but they get thrown at me. you know, I'm playing it back on a $15,000 D-to-A converter. You're not getting that in your home stereo usually too. So I think that's one reason why it can sound better.
Good point, because a lot of people think, oh, it's digital is digital. You can answer that question. Digital is digital, and it doesn't matter what you play it back on. It's all perfect. Let's face it, it's a Nyquist theorem, 20K, blah, blah, blah. They have an answer for everything, and you're crazy if you think otherwise.
You know, I don't think it's necessarily as simple as that these days. I think, you know,
It never was, right?
no, there's a lot of magic and wizardry going on with digital as well, and there's tricks and techniques you can do that, you know, like using kind of noise-shaped dither and things like that to increase the bit depth, and a lot of it is psychoacoustics. You know, whatever people think. You know, when it comes down to it, if people think it sounds better, it is better.
That's what matters. It's all psychoacoustics, right? You can't take an orchestra and stuff it into 2 microphones and think you're going to get an orchestra playing that.
Right, and at the same time though, if you're playing like a 192 kilobit per second MP3 that's been encoded using some crappy MP3 encoder, you're going to get what you pay for, you know, and it's you know, you can't polish crap.
So when people online try to make the point that, you know, Neil Young is selling crap by trying to sell high resolution digital because MP3s are pretty much perfect. You can't hear the difference. Does that drive you crazy? I know it makes me crazy.
You know, we did some work with Neil Young. We had, I mean, in Gen X, I've worked with him on projects, and in DTS, we've had him in on the Pono project. He was looking at our codec as a possibility, but you know, it's one of those things. If people want to pay for it and they feel like they're getting a better experience, then that's, you know.
Do you think they are getting it back? I mean,
it depends where you're getting the source from.
well,
right?
the source is always king, right? I mean, that's what really matters. If it's a bad recording, you can't do anything about it, right? But you can take a good recording and ruin it, too, right? Like when they want to make the dynamic. So, anybody have any questions they would like to ask? Don't be shy.
Not the red guy. The digital people will say that people prefer analog because it has distortions that we like.
Okay, so what Dan is saying is that people say we prefer analog because there's distortions that we like. But isn't all recording a distortion?
I'm not saying that's true.
No, right. So what do you think that's true?
Well, in some ways, yeah.
It's an additive distortion that we like.
Yeah, because all of these things, all these mediums change the sound.
Right, that's the key.
They all have their personality.
That's the key.
So it's almost like they all are big equalizers, you know, or something. But the thing about vinyl is, I think that everybody likes it because it is comfortable. It sounds a little more musical because you don't, the artifacts, the digital artifacts, seem not to show up as much. Something like that.
On the record.
Yeah, on a record.
Or they're smoothed out.
Or they're smooth. Yeah, they're a little bit smoothed out because digital actually, many times, if you look at it this way, analog responds slow, relatively, to responds slowly to a transient, to an attack of an instrument or something like that. Like tape does that, and all of these things that are magnetically controlled and so forth have a lag time. And so what happens is the stuff isn't so hard-edged, whereas in digital they're actually too fast a lot of times because the sampling rate isn't high enough to be able to measure that ramp. So all it does is goes from one state to the other one. And so like when you hear a guitar or something, it sounds like switches being turned off and on. It almost doesn't sound like a guitar sometimes because it's not accurate. But you're impressed because it's really clear.
At first you're impressed,
Yeah, at
and then
first you're
after
impressed.
20 minutes you say, get me out of here.
That's right. That's what'll happen. But when you cut it on a disc, the disc slows it down a little bit and it returns it almost back to the
That's the point. That's the point.
Yeah.
Never mind digital versus analog. How about mono versus stereo?
That's
Okay,
another.
okay, this is an important point.
Mono versus stereo.
This is a very important point. Now, when you're listening to a stereo record that's very binaural, have you ever noticed that when an instrument comes on one speaker, it's way better than anything you hear in the center? And the reason for that is that acoustically, there's all kinds of adding and subtracting of that signal because no two speakers are perfectly linear without any peaks and dips and unevenness in the spectrum. So what happens is when you get an instrument on one speaker, you don't have the interference of the other one trying to reproduce the same thing. And so that it's so clear and so real, like a vibraphone or something in one speaker, it's like, whoa. But then again, you don't have the spatial thing. You don't have the depth, quite the same depth, so, you know, it's a trade-off. It's very difficult to get anything, even the cutter head. A mono cutter head will sound better than a stereo cutter head because they're mechanical devices and they're not perfectly linear. So between the left and right channel of a cutter head, they're not tracking absolutely perfect. So you're going to get some adding and subtracting. It's not going to be perfectly accurate.